Yesterday we talked about this idea of threshold, and I want to expand on that whole idea and bring this stuff about Ilya Prigogine and chaos theory into it because it's the most elegant model that I have ever seen of how change actually happens. And beyond that, it gives you a little piece that allows you to deal with change and move through it and recognize the stages, particularly the stages that are uncomfortable, and see the whole process in a new way. Now, in order to do this, we have to travel back in time to the 1850s, which, with the advent of the steam engine, scientists began to formulate the laws of thermodynamics because they began to deal with the heat and energy exchange in these machines that were then becoming popular as the mechanical machine industrial age kind of got off the ground in the 1850s. And the law of thermodynamics we're interested in is the second law of thermodynamics, which is also known as the law of increasing entropy. Now, entropy is a measure in any system of the amount of randomness or chaos in a system. And when they began to study how a steam engine works and how, for instance, it would power a locomotive, they realized that all of the energy that was in the coal that they were burning in the whatever you call that, the boiler, right? All of that was not turned into motion in the locomotive. That when work was done, some energy was always lost, and it really became entropy. There was a certain amount of randomness or chaos or that was lost, and all of the energy did not get translated into the work. So, and then in addition to that, the steam in moving a piston, there was heat loss there, but also the piston itself would wear down, and eventually the machine would break down. It even would become more random. And in fact, all machines will break down eventually unless energy is added to them. That there is a tendency for things to kind of go downhill, you might say, and dissipate and become more chaotic, more random. So the law of increasing entropy really says that that everything naturally tends toward increased disorder. A mountain eventually will be worn down by the weather and the wind and water running down the hill and so on. You know, the Appalachian Mountains used to be much higher than they are now, but eventually these mountains all get worn down. These chairs that we're sitting on someday will be dust again. Everything eventually, and so will we, everything eventually wears down and disperses. And this is an irrevocable law of the universe. Scientists and mathematicians have proven beyond any shadow of a doubt that the amount of randomness, the amount of entropy in the universe is always increasing. So this sort of presented scientists at the time with a problem, because you can look around you and see that there are some things in the universe that increase the amount of order that they have. In fact, life itself is the prime example of this. Atoms became molecules, and molecules became amino acids, and amino acids became proteins, and proteins became single-celled life, and single-celled life became multicellular life, and tissues and organ systems within organisms, and then the organisms form social groups, and on and on. There is this other tendency toward order, or what we might call evolution. So the problem for scientists was, if we are in a universe that is irrevocably becoming more random, more chaotic, then where does this other thing come from? How, in the face of the second law of thermodynamics, the law of increasing entropy, how can things evolve? How can things become more ordered? And because these scientists were operating in a Newtonian scientific framework of cause and effect, and where scientists typically would isolate the different elements that they wanted to study. For instance, they would, in Newtonian physics, you could say, if I take a ball and I go like this and I throw it, depending on the exact force I impart to that ball and the exact trajectory that I throw it at, Newtonian laws can predict exactly how far that ball, where it will hit the ground, with what force it will hit the ground, how much it will rebound when it hits the ground, all of those things. But they're doing that kind of in isolation. They're not taking into account all of the many interconnected events that we talked about the first day when we were talking about things being all one energy. So this problem was really too complex for science to look at until they got to the 1960s and 1970s. And in the early 1970s, a Belgian-born Russian scientist named Ilya Prigogine solved this problem. He figured out what was going on and why things could become more ordered, why things could evolve, and how the process happened, even in the face of the second law of thermodynamics. And what Prigogine discovered was extremely interesting and actually startling to the scientific community, because he found out that things did not become more ordered in spite of entropy. They became more ordered because of entropy. And that it really rocked the scientific community. And Prigogine's description of this process is really a description about how all things evolve and grow and change, including human beings. And that's why it so elegantly describes what is going on when we change and we evolve, and that's why it's important that you understand it. Now, one of the concepts that Prigogine introduced that really made it possible for him to figure this out was the concept of an open system. In the past, scientists were studying closed systems, or really artificially closed systems. Everybody probably remembers from chemistry class when they would say, take a cube that is, an enclosed cube that has so many molecules of hydrogen in it, and then we'll increase the temperature, or we'll increase the pressure, and they talk about they take these idealized closed systems and then do things to them to illustrate certain scientific, chemical, whatever points. Well, the reason they were doing that is because they didn't have the science available to look at things in their, infinite interdependence, all the interconnections that make up the reality that's happening to all these systems of things in the universe. So what Prigogine began to look at are what he called open systems. And an open system is very different than these artificial closed systems. An open system is a process. An open system is something that is taking in from its environment, and then it's also giving out to its environment. So it's a flow. And as a matter of fact, human beings are a flow. Alan Watts always talks about how our language is not adequate to describe reality, and a lot of that is because English and European languages in particular are so heavy with nouns. Alan Watts reminds us that there's no such thing as a thing. There's only processes. He says we should call a whirlpool a whirlpooling. because it's not a thing. It's something, you know, coming into and passing out of the whirlpool. He thinks that a cat should be called a catting because it's the universe catting. So he would say the catting sat on the matting because the mat is matting. That everything really is a process of taking in and giving out. There's a flow. And as everyone knows, your whole body regenerates itself every, I don't know what the time period is, and it's different for different parts of your body, but there's you're taking in heat and cosmic rays and oxygen and food and all kinds of sensory input. All kinds of input is coming in, and then you're giving off carbon dioxide and energy and heat and all kinds of waste products and whatever creativity that you give off in creating things.